Welcome to WashingtonExec's video series. I'm your host, Doug Russell. Today's guest is Cindy Otis, a former CIA analyst turned disinformation expert and vice president at Alethea Group, who recently released the book titled True or False, a CIA Analyst Guide to Spotting Fake News. Welcome to the program, Cindy.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Well, this looks like a fascinating book. Can you tell us a little bit more about True or False and what prompted you to write this book for the young adult audience, please?
Sure. So True or False is essentially a history of fake news and disinformation, in which I focus on some key historical events and how fake news and disinformation have affected those events. These are the kinds of public figures and events that most readers would have heard about. And I use that to sort of build a roadmap for how we can address the issue today. It's also very much a guide. So it includes very actionable and tactical sorts of tips and tricks and exercises that people can use to, essentially keep themselves safe online, spot instances of false information, and make sure that they're consulting good sources. And I wrote it in particular for the young adult audience, though it's certainly accessible to adults as well. Because if you think about it, my generation of folks are the generation where the internet was starting to become a thing in households. But for young readers now, they've essentially been online since the day they were born, when their parents were snapping pictures of their birth in the delivery room. And so they're, from day one, really under this fire hose of information from so many different sources, to where my generation really can't understand how formative that is and what that's like. And so I really felt like this generation needed, in particular, the tools and training to be able to, again, sort of keep themselves safe online and make sure that they're not contributing to the problem of fake news and disinformation.
A lot of valid points there. So I think really your book's position really is a tool for a lot of the everyday people to help identify and kind of stop the spread of misinformation. And the question comes is, do you think that is a problem only people can solve, or do you think technology companies have a role to play in this?
So I definitely argue that this issue is such a complex one that it really is going to take a whole of community effort to solve. So that means there's a role for everybody. There's a role for average information consumers to do some vetting of their own and employ good social media practices. But there's absolutely a role for social media companies, for technology companies, for academia and the nonprofit space, for the federal government, certainly. When it comes to the technology companies, in particular social media platforms, their role is really in helping users of their platform understand where information is coming from. It shouldn't take, although my book does focus on teaching people the tools to spot some of this stuff themselves, I certainly don't expect, and neither should social media platforms, for people to be able to be disinformation investigators and to find all the Russians for them. That's not their responsibility. Social media platform users should be able to ask questions like, can I rely on this? What are good sources of information? But social media companies and technology companies have a role in making sure that people know who's putting this information in front of me. Is it being paid for by a company or an organization? Those are all important pieces of information that can help then the users understand whether information they're seeing is accurate or not.
Thank you for that. So as you know, we're in the midst of an infodemic, and it comes at a time where trust and truth seem to be hard to come by. Your book puts emphasis on identifying truth as well. Can you talk about why it was so important to make sure that the truth had a role in your book?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was a key piece of my book, and one of my strong motivations for writing it was, as a disinformation researcher, seeing the last couple of years, the effects of steady diets of disinformation and false information, leading people to increasingly distrust those pillars and institutions that we have traditionally relied on to provide accurate information. So things like people losing faith in the government, losing trust in media to provide accurate information, And the result of that, that slowly sort of degradation of trust in these institutions has been that people are increasingly turning towards more extreme positions and ideas for answers. So this is, sort of the sort of mainstreaming of conspiracy theories that we've seen, particularly in the last couple of years, and certainly within the last year, of people embracing these more fringe ideas because the thought is, well, if I can't trust these institutions that I've relied on throughout my life, why not believe this, this claim or this conspiracy group or this person who's, spouting on YouTube, for example. Um, and so, being able to talk about the fact that truth still exists,
Mhm.
facts are things that you can count on. It might take a little bit of work to uncover those facts and to vet your sources of information, but it's absolutely worth it because the idea of otherwise going to the extreme and increasingly removing yourself from your community, not participating in things like the electoral process, for example, because you no longer trust it, those are very, very dangerous to democratic societies, and where we've seen a lot of sort of democratic erosion in the last couple of years is stemming from that sort of increasing disenfranchisement.
These are all valid points. I think certainly this book seems very timely with an election coming up here in November. Everyone's anxious to see what that is. And I think your point to the kind of distrust of an institution, that idea out there is sort of certainly challenging. So we're about out of time here, Cindy. So true or false, book to come out, it's released. Please tell our viewers where can we find this book?
Sure. So it's available in electronic, audiobook, and hard copy as well. But you can get it wherever books are sold. I highly encourage folks to support their local independent bookstores if possible. Otherwise, all of the usual places, such as Bookshop, Indie Books, Walmart, Target, Barnes & Noble, Amazon.
Wonderful. Excellent. Well, Cindy, thank you so much for your time today and best of luck to you.
Thanks so much.